Counselor at Large. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council's Committee on Education and the sponsor of this docket. I'm also joined by my colleagues in order of arrival, Counselor Erin Murphy, who is also happens to be my co-chair of education, Counselor Ruthie Louis-Jean at Large, and Counselor Ed Flynn, District 2. Today's, in accordance to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually and in person. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibility while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on www.boston.gov/city-council-TV and via broadcast on Xfinity 8 and RCN Channel 82 and Files 964. It would also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Anyone that would like to testify virtually on this matter, please email juan.lopez@boston.gov with your full name for the Zoom link. We will also take in-person public testimony and ask that you sign in to testify or to register your attendance right over there. Those who wish to testify virtually but wish to remain anonymous may do so by informing our central staff liaison in their email. And that is really important. I just want to uplift that this is an opportunity for people to share their experiences and to do so in a safe way. So we are encouraging folks to testify anonymously if they feel most comfortable doing that. For those in attendance and in the chamber, we ask that you please silence your electronic devices. All right, everybody go on mute. Today's hearing is on docket 0198, addressing sexual assault and harassment in Boston Public Schools. We are joined by the following panelists today. Rebecca Schuster, Assistant Superintendent of Equity for BPS. Katina Hayes, a parent who will be joining us virtually. Dr. Gail Crump-Swaby, Associate Professor of Counseling, Clinical Mental Health and Counseling Coordinator, and Deputy Chief Fran Johnson from Boston Public School Safety Services. That's panel one, just so you know. Captain Hussein, there's gonna be a little switch up, okay? All right. Panel two is Maya McNeil, who is a Youth Mental Health Ambassador, Dr. Charmaine Jackson, who is a psychologist, Sam DePina, Deputy Superintendent of Operations for Boston Public Schools, Lieutenant Richard Driscoll, Commander of the Sexual Assault Unit for BPD, and Captain Hussein, Bureau of Community Engagement at BPD. Before I turn it over to my colleagues, I'd like to make a few brief remarks to how this hearing will be conducted. So for those who have been following me, you know, hearings are hearings, and it's an opportunity for us to hear. Our office was really intentional about making sure that we created a trauma-informed space. And we really want folks who are going to be here today to recognize that this is not about coming in and feeling like you are on trial. This is really an opportunity for us to really learn from each other what is working, what is not working, and what can we be doing collectively to help support our students. So I really want those from the administration in particular to know that you are in a safe space. And for those who are following along, and for our parents and our students that are going to be here today, know that this space was created with a lot of intentionality and making sure that we are taking care of you and your social and emotional well-being. So with that, I also would like to know that we have reserved the curly room right across the hall where there's snacks, water, and tissues in the event folks need to take a minute to breathe. Please excuse yourself, and someone from my staff, Asla or Sarah, will escort you to the back. Okay, so we really want to be super mindful of the energy that's in this room and hold ourselves accountable to a space that is going to make people feel as most comfortable and as safe as possible. And because I really totally went off script, let me go back here. Our goal in this hearing is to develop a better understanding of current policies and cultures that exist at Boston Public Schools that contribute to or neglect instances of sexual assault and harassment, as well as bullying, either between students, between faculty, or between students and faculty. This is going to be a hard conversation, and we are working with the tools that we have to create a trauma-informed space. Also noting that we have 2 clinicians here to help support us as well. Our goal in this hearing is to not force people to reveal their trauma or to go into an unsafe headspace. If myself or any of my colleagues contribute to that culture, please let us know that it's not coming from bad intentions, but please correct us when needed, okay? It's really important for you to take care of yourself. The conversation will proceed as follows. First, we'll hear opening remarks from my colleagues. Then we'll turn it over to our first panel to offer their testimony, followed by questions from my council colleagues. From there, we'll hear testimony from our second panel, followed by questions from my colleagues. I will then ask members of our panel to speak for roughly 5 minutes, okay? Now, if you use those 5 minutes, great, and if you don't, awesome. But we really don't want this to be it's not really about PowerPoint presentations, and I know, Becky, you have one, and that's all good, but this is really a conversation, right? So just be in that space and embrace it as such, okay? I always encourage people to speak from their heart, because when you do, you feel more fully expressed. Then we're going to have public testimony. Each speaker will have roughly about 2 minutes. And I know that seems like a short amount of time, but we're hoping that this will give members of the public enough time to share their story without encouraging people to reveal their trauma in a negative way. So I just want to be super mindful of the time. I will now ask my colleagues to provide opening remarks. And I am going back to order of arrival. That's you, starting with my colleague, Councilor Murphy. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for holding this important hearing. I appreciate your bravery. So as most of you know, I was an educator for 24 years. I've been a mother for 33 years. All children deserve to be safe. And I knew as a teacher, the first thing I needed to do was make sure my students were safe before I even began to teach them. So that is the number one important thing. We as a city need to make sure our children, if they're in school, wherever they are in the city, but we're here talking about what's happening in our schools, so making sure that all of our students feel safe and our parents feel safe. And I've had conversations not just around sexual assaults, but just crime in the city, and talking to families at the Charlestown High graduation. And there's safety, and the police can tell us this is a safe situation, but if people don't feel safe, even if the reality is you are safe, then we haven't done our job. So it goes deep when we have these conversations. And also when it's about this topic, the stigma associated with it and the silence many people choose because they don't want to share, or they feel the victim will be re-victimized. And unfortunately, I should say horrifically, we've read like the Mission Hill report and we've heard. So when I look up, and I know as a teacher, and oftentimes I had to sign off on the superintendent circulars. So your slideshow here will be very informative. I know I've looked at it before, but there is a link on a website you can click and you can read the Office of Equity and how they're preventing and addressing sexual misconduct. But if you're a kindergartner, you can't do that. If you're a fourth grader, you can't do that. So making sure that all of our staff, not just our classroom teachers, feel safe to report when they think something is not going right, and that our families don't feel like they're not able to connect to the right person, and that the children in our schools feel safe is important to me. So I am here to listen, to learn, and be part of this important conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. I am now going to move to Councilor at Large Ruth C. Louisiane.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you for holding this hearing. I want to thank all the students who are here to offer testimony to the administration for coming and to address these issues. Really important that we create spaces in our schools where our young people feel safe, and when they don't feel safe, we fail them. We also need to make sure that we are providing our young people with adults that they can trust and that they feel like they can turn to. I'm becoming a broken record on this. My guidance counselor in my high school experience was really pivotal. A Black woman who is now my neighbor, and I am really grateful that I had her to help me through some of the more difficult moments in life as a high school student. And I hope that we are doing more to provide, I want us to do more, to provide more guidance counselors and social workers and school psychiatrists in all of our schools. I don't want us to just be meeting the national standard. I want us to be exceeding that. As someone who myself went to Boston Public Schools and not in school, but on my way to school was a victim of sexual assault, I know how difficult it is for our young kids to really carry that trauma with them. And I didn't report or share with anyone. And so I take the responsibility today as a city councilor very seriously to make sure that we are creating spaces where our young folks feel like they don't carry that shame with them, which is what happened to me. I carried it as it was an act of shame, to make sure that we are providing young folks the space to talk about it, both with the resources and adults. So thank you to my council colleagues for holding this hearing. Thank you to administration for the work that you're doing. We hold these hearings to hold you accountable, but also to hear about the work that you're doing and to see how we can partner together in this work to be there and support our young folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louisiane. I'm going to my colleague, Council President Ed.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you to my colleagues for the important work they're doing on this issue. Thank you to the panelists for being here and the work you're doing. I also want to acknowledge the incredible role of the bravery, really, of the students and the families, our BPS families, for their courage during these difficult times. I also wanted to highlight I had the opportunity for many years to work with Captain Hussein, so I have great respect for the work you do, Captain, but also the Boston Police Department team as well. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I'll just offer a few brief remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Schuster. So, I often talk about how the personal is professional and sometimes the professional is political, and all of these things are intersected, right? And so as we start thinking about this conversation, my hope is that the families that are listening and the students that are participating feel whole, because oftentimes we are left out. And so my hope is that we can get to a good place as we move through this. And I know that, as part of our outreach, we talked about that this could be triggering. And I just want to, again, reiterate, if we need to take a recess or for whatever the case is, that we really want to be super mindful of that space for everyone here. So I just wanted to thank the administration, our clinicians here today, and the families that are joining us to be fully expressed. So I'm going to now turn the floor over to Assistant Superintendent Schuster. You now have the floor.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Councilor Mejia, for your initiative in making this event happen. And I know Councilor Murphy was very obviously committed to this issue as well. And it's an issue that we are passionate about in the Boston Public Schools, and that I personally am passionate about as the person who leads the Office of Equity. As many of you know, there are 4 total offices in the Boston Public Schools that are involved with equity issues, but our particular office is in the lead role in terms of preventing and addressing sexual misconduct, whether it impacts our students or our staff or anyone else who comes into a BPS building or attends a BPS activity. I've been with the district now nearly 7 years, but perhaps even more importantly, I am here as a BPS mother. My daughter is a junior now and has gone all the way through the Boston Public Schools, so I experience this issue both as a mother of a daughter as well as an employee of the district and a leader on this issue. So I am here with a number of other folks from the Boston Public Schools who will be available throughout our time together to answer questions. I'll do my best to answer as many as I can, but there's some really thoughtful experts in the room who have a different perspective than I do. Sam DePina is here, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Operations. Deputy Chief Fran Johnson is here from Safety Services. Unfortunately, my colleague Quinnell Gomez, who leads our investigative work, had a family emergency and is not able to be here, but Grace Jung is here, who is from the Office of Equity and is our Director of Training and Accommodations and has been involved with intake in particular of concerns related to sexual misconduct for several years. And lastly, Susie Spressert is here, who we work with closely in the Office of Equity. She is from our Office of Health and Wellness, and she is an instructional coach who oversees health education and specifically sexual health education for K through 12. And I hope we'll have a chance to hear from her at some point. So I'm going to just give you a quick, I'll try to keep to my 5 minutes, Councilor Mejia, overview of the work of the Office of Equity in relation to this issue. So first of all, the overall mission of our office is to ensure that all of our students, our staff, our families are able to flourish in our school communities and in our central office without being impacted by any form of discrimination, including sexual harassment or sexual assault. And in terms of sexual misconduct in particular, it is our role in the Office of Equity to do everything in our power to prevent sexual misconduct, most importantly, but when it does occur, where there are allegations, to address them promptly and thoroughly. And some of you have heard me say before, no matter what that call is about that comes to our office, that email, that request for assistance, we always strive to leave that situation better than we found it. Sometimes we get calls about things that are, we might call insensitivity, other times far more egregious concerns. Regardless of how serious they are, we always want to assist the folks who are seeking our assistance. And it's important to say that there are sometimes cases that are brought to us that involve non-BPS alleged perpetrators. In those instances, we partner with the appropriate outside authorities because obviously we don't, we will provide supports to the individual who brought those concerns, but we're not able to investigate someone who's not part of our BPS community. And I should mention, because you brought up bullying, Councilor Mejia, that we do also closely partner with our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week bullying hotline, which is part of the Counseling and Intervention Center at Succeed Boston. So when it's a bias-based bullying situation or it's sexual in nature, the Office of Equity handles it. When it's bullying of a more generic nature, it would stay with the outstanding staff at our bullying hotline. Try to make that work. Oh wait, how was it? There we go. Okay. So in terms of addressing sexual misconduct, of course, as Councilor Murphy said, the Boston Public Schools has no higher priority than the safety of our students. We hurl ourselves at the challenge of keeping every student safe in every possible way, including safe from sexual misconduct. Our office focuses on providing a prompt, effective response to any report of possible sexual misconduct, regardless of where it occurred. If it affects our student, then it is our business to address it in every way we know how. Depending on the nature of the incident, who was involved, when did it happen, where did it happen, was it minor or was it egregious, depending on the nature. Sometimes the very first thing we do is a safety plan. That is working closely with the student and their family to think about every possible step we can take so that they are safe at school. We investigate what occurred. Sometimes the school leads the investigation. Sometimes the Office of Equity leads it, depending on the nature of the situation. Where appropriate, we apply the code of conduct, and as many of you are aware, the Boston Public Schools has made extraordinary strides under Sam DePina's leadership, Dacia Campbell's leadership, at ensuring that our code of conduct is about helping students whose conduct has gone off track. So yes, there are some traditional forms of discipline that occur in the Boston Public Schools, but there's also some wonderful work happening with identifying root causes, having effective interventions that are deeply caring of our student and what's happening for that student at home and past and present at school. And also where it's appropriate, and there are very narrow circumstances where it's appropriate for sexual misconduct, but where it's appropriate, we also use restorative justice. We make referrals so that every student who's impacted has the support that they need, whether that's mental health services or other social and emotional supports. We document very carefully what occurred so that we make sure we've taken every step that is our obligation to take. And we determine any other steps that we can, as I said earlier, to make sure we leave things better than we found them. It's important to know that all of our employees, every single one, regardless of their role in the district, whether they serve food, whether they are a teacher, whether they are a central office manager, we are all obligated under BPS policy to report any concern that it might possibly be true that sexual misconduct may have occurred. Any allegation, any rumor, any hint that sexual misconduct has impacted one of our students, our staff is obligated to report that. And if they fail in that obligation, they are subject to discipline. Also, a subsection of our employees are mandatory reporters in terms of any concerns that could be child abuse of any kind or sexual violence in this case, are of course reported through 51A reporting to the Department of Children and Families. And in instances where there may be sexual violence, we're also in close partnership with Fran Johnson and his team in safety services, as well as the district attorney's office when that's necessary. In terms of prevention, we have a big range of programs, and I'll try to be brief, to prevent sexual misconduct from occurring. Both, of course, lots of programming for students, the prevention programming that Susie Spresser is involved with comprehensive health education, including a program on healthy, safe bodies for all of our fifth graders that gives them an intensive understanding of consent, teaching them about consent, boundaries, sexual harassment. So there's the overarching prevention work that we do through education, but we also use education when we need to intervene. When there has been misconduct, we work with the students who engaged in misconduct to help them understand the impact of their behavior, help to identify the root causes, and ensure that nothing like that is ever repeated. We're very proud in the Office of Equity of 24/7 Respect. We won a Telly Award, a national award for this program that teaches our middle and high school students how to prevent and address sexual misconduct and bias-based conduct. And we have a number of other efforts to ensure that our employees understand their obligations to report, including what we call our equity protocols training.
I just want to do a little quick
that's
time check. That's it.
Yeah, I'm done.
Well, okay,
So
I was
there you
about to regulate, let you know.
I finished.
Good job, I gave you
All
extra
right.
time. You're gonna
Thank
live a
you so
little bit
much. I
longer.
appreciate it. We have a lot of good work that we're doing, and I tried to be as succinct as I could.
Thank you, Superintendent Schuster. I believe we have Katina Hay virtually, who will be joining us. She's going to be bringing in her perspective as a parent. So, Katina, if you are with us and you have the Zoom and you're in the space.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Awesome.
Okay, awesome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. You now have the floor.
Thank you. I am a parent of Boston Public Schools high school student, and she is a female. Earlier on in this year, my daughter came home and told me that essentially she was sexually assaulted in the school. The school did not call me. The teachers did not call me. No one in an official capacity called me. My daughter told. I asked my daughter if she had made it known what had occurred. She said it happened maybe 3 weeks before, but that she did eventually go to the authority figures and or adults in the school and advise what happened to her. I asked her why she didn't go immediately. She said, well, I just didn't want to make any trouble. I didn't want to make, and why the thought that she would have been making a problem, quote unquote, or trouble for anyone, that still is beyond me. If someone does something like that to you, you should explain, yourself and let it be known what happened to you. And that is what I relayed to my daughter. She went to the school staff, and again, no call, no interaction with me as the parent. And my daughter gave me a little bit of feedback on the information or the feedback that she got when she went to them. In her opinion, and the way she felt, was as though they just wanted it to go away. They were brushing it under the rug, sweeping it under the rug and trying to convince her that, well, and I can't say verbatim what was said to her, but that was the attitude. Well, you know, are you sure you want to, So my daughter said she felt unsupported. She felt alone. But I assured my daughter at the time, she's never alone. Never, ever alone when she has me. When she asked them about filing charges against the young man, basically they just said, oh, well, we don't have enough evidence. How do you know you don't have enough? Have you really investigated? Well, we spoke to his parents. And we spoke to him. I said, there's a victim in this. You didn't think enough to call the victim's parents? And honestly, from what I understand, being on the ground and being very active in my daughter's school community, this is not unusual. Will I say what school? Absolutely not. Will I say who my daughter is? Absolutely not. However, it is not unusual in the school. I know others in our community. It is not unusual in Boston public schools. It happens more often than you think. So we are still on our end here, my daughter and I, struggling because I don't want to put my daughter through undue stress. The young man profusely apologized via text, but he walked around the school telling everyone my daughter was lying. So then my daughter began to experience bullying from his female friends who believed him, and my daughter could have sat there and whipped out a phone, but it's not appropriate. So she did not. So I've been on top of the school. When she said she wanted to speak out about what happened to her, one of her counselors said, well, that could be triggering. What does that mean? So what about the victim? Triggering to who? Because if it's helping her, I don't see what the issue is. So I have a problem with things being hidden, swept under the rug, trying to save reputation more than save these children. That is a problem. Not only with sexual assault, but with violence, period. Violence, period. They said that basically students did not need that information for his safety. I said at that point, as I told the people in his school, and I just got that information from my daughter, who is sitting here. And that's what she was told. Well, 400 students doesn't need that information for his safety. but my daughter can't walk down the hallway without someone saying, oh, you said this and you said that. It's ridiculous. So I don't think there's a feeling of safety across the board in many ways. Again, not only sexual assault, but physical violence from child to child, from group to group. It's rampant. And whether it's being reported to city council, whether it's being reported to the mayor's office or the superintendent, I have no idea. But I know it exists. It exists. And at this time, that is my viewpoint.
Thank you. Thank you, Katina. Really do appreciate you bringing your voice into this space. And this is an opportunity, right, for us to hear and learn, and more importantly, figure out what we're going to do. So I really do appreciate your testimony, and more importantly, your courage to share. So thank you for that. And I'm not sure if you've been advised, but we want you to stay a little bit longer, because we have an opportunity to bring your voice back in during the second panel. So if your schedule permits, after we ask questions and move on to the second panel, there might be another opportunity for us to have you
Absolutely.
also. Oh, thank you, my love. I appreciate that. So I'm gonna move on to our next panelist, and that is Dr. Gail Crump-Swaby. You now have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. Again, my name is Dr. Gail Crump-Swaby. I live and work in a Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. I am a parent of a 16-year-old student who attends Boston Public School. I am also a mental health therapist, an advocate, and an associate professor of counseling and the director of clinical mental health counseling program for a college here in Massachusetts. I am here today to ask this committee to continue to work to address and examine how sexual assaults and misconducts are handled by the Boston Public School administration. This topic is near and dear to my heart because I work with a lot of young people. The issues of sex and sexuality, those words are positive words. And as much as we want to not talk about it or feel uncomfortable with the word, it's part of who we are. It's part of our core being. It's part of what makes us whole, just as much as our physical, our mental, our emotional, and our spiritual health and well-being. And I had to put my words down on paper so that I could follow my own thoughts here, so bear with me. Now, when you add words such as abuse or exploitation, assault, and harassment, it changes the course of our well-being. It changes the word and how you think about sex and sexuality. It turns a positive into a negative. It becomes this thing that keeps us from our core selves. So again, why am I here today? I come before you as a parent and as a mental health therapist and an advocate. As a mental health therapist, we know that sexual health is part of good mental health and should not be marginalized or taken lightly. As a professor who teaches a human sexuality class, I remember once in preparation for one of my class, I came across a quote that says, in our culture, no one escapes having some form of sexual damage. Unfortunately, this statement describes not only the influence of culture on lay people, but also the mental health of the people who educate our children. Perhaps anyone in here may have experienced being sexually harassed on a schoolyard or a workplace. You may be the one in 4 women or the one in 6 men who were molested as children and who did not feel supported enough by parents or school to reveal it. Therefore, sexual assault, misconduct, harassment does not belong in any environment much less an environment that's supposed to keep our children safe. When it comes to the person who has experienced any kind of sexual assault or harassment, we can think of their experience being riddled with these 4 S words: silence, secrecy, stigma, and shame. Almost everyone is raised in an atmosphere of secrecy when it comes to the emotional and psychological aspects of sex. However, as I have learned from my clients, the teens who I work with, they have sexual problems that plague them, sometimes leading to depression, eating disorders, alcoholism, and other mental illness. We know all too well secrecy and silence are associated with feelings of shame and guilt that can contribute to overall poor mental health. Nowhere perhaps is this truer than when it affects their sexual development. Our physical and psychological sexual development takes place on different planes, and interactions between and among systems reflect this. It doesn't help that the word sex, have a murky side. Subjects such as sexual assault, harassment, tend to be hushed by the victim. And if they learn about it, family members also, or friends, are hushed. It isn't difficult to surmise that one reason school administration and educators may avoid the topic of sexual assault is that they have been victims themselves of any kind of sexual assault or have been exposed to other types of negative sexual experiences, from mild harassment to outright assault. Another reason for silence about sexual assaults and harassment is the fear of becoming isolated or being ostracized by others, as we heard from Ms. Katina. Then there are those who find dealing with sexual problems too uncomfortable or distasteful. As stated earlier, we have yet to fully recognize that sexual issues can contribute to depression, anxiety, trauma, eating disorders, substance abuse, pain disorders, and you can keep going. And these issues do not escape our children. Conversely, such problems can affect a person's sexuality and should not remain unaddressed in our schools. Yet, if we don't address these issues, we may miss out on an essential part of what is troubling our children. Our children need reassurance that they are acceptable or lovable even when they report these issues. They need to hear these 3 phrases: I am with you, I see you, I hear you. This is the type of presence that helps youth feel safe and trusting with us. Together, we can support our children to become self-advocates and self-confident, who will go out into this world to do amazing things. I am asking this committee to please exercise your authority and work to eradicate the 4 S's I mentioned: the silence, the secrecy, the stigma, and the shame. And I would encourage you to be steadfast in providing these 5 S's: security, safety, stability, support, and solutions, that we can sustain their self-esteem, their survival, and their healthy sexual development and mental wellness. Again, I stress these 3 phrases that our young people need to hear: I am with you, I see you, I hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I know Councilor Murphy's taking notes on the 3 S's and the 5 S's, and thank you for that, Dr. Crump-Swaby. Really do appreciate you bringing your full self into this space.
Thank you.
I am going to, I believe the way we have our panelists set up, that we have Deputy Johnson, if you're in the building, or no?
Councilor, Deputy Johnson wasn't planning to speak, but is absolutely available to answer questions.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you for that. So, Deputy Johnson, why don't you make your way down here? You don't have to speak, or you're just going to be part of the Q&A, because you probably have information that will be helpful to us. So thank you for that. Yeah, Dr. Jackman, you're on the second panel. Thank you. All right. So we're gonna now open up the floor to my colleagues to ask their questions. And, you know, I usually am timing everything, but I have relinquished that because in the spirit of the space that we're in and in the space that we're trying to create, I did not want to put anyone in that space. So I'm just gonna monitor time and let you all kind of like be fully expressed. So I'm going to start off with Councilor Murphy. You now have the floor.
And thank you for that. And Katina, I know you're there on the screen, so thank you for sharing and being brave. To you, Doctor, your words made me realize, because like I said, I was a teacher in BPS and we were not trained as a staff. I often speak about the social emotional wellness my students needed, but I always got taught how to teach them how to read or write, you know, but never how to address their social emotional needs. So I took that upon myself. Like I went and did my own training. I had my yoga training and social emotional training, but your words are definitely something that I know central staff, principals, school bus drivers, classroom teachers need to hear. So thank you for that, and thank you for just those words of making sure that children know that when something happens to them, that they're still valuable and wonderful, and how do we, you know, make sure. And when you were speaking, I know we're talking about sexual harassment in this case, but you know as a clinician that it reminded me of so many other spaces when we talk about recovery and people who often suffer trying to, you know, get sober. It's because of that silence and the stigma often that it becomes harder. So many struggles in our life become harder when we as a society don't open up and support each other. So no direct questions, just want to thank you for that. But to you, and because you're here for the school department, unfortunately, many of the things that she was saying, many students report that they don't feel that way, or if they're victimized, we hear time and time again that they feel like they're being re-victimized when they don't feel as though the school is taking it seriously or the right in. There's often, and I know there's pushback because there's privacy issues about, you know, victims or those who allegedly did something, but when you talked about the victims, right, so there's student against student, student and staff, right, staff, student, staff, staff, but then you mentioned, so all of those would be internal, in a sense. You mentioned the internal and the external, and then there could be a case, say, someone's at the school, a visitor, or the students are outside of the school building, right? So it could be someone outside of the building. And maybe I heard it wrong, but it seemed as though when that happens, that's when the police can get involved. Or that's when you would move outside of the principal's discretion, right? So the principal, so my question is going to be, is it case by case, or is there this rule that we can trust that principals don't get to decide, classroom teachers don't get to decide, the district doesn't get to decide, that when we know this happens, that we're always including the school safety officers and the Boston Police and any other, if it's Boston Public Health Commission, that, and if we're overreacting, well, great, right? It's children, or it's staff, it's teachers being assaulted too, right? It's our workforce. So if you could talk to that, and also the 51A. Because I know that I'm a mandated reporter as a teacher, and if I saw something, I would hope that there were 5 51A reports written, not just one. If a child gets to the hospital or a child is found to have been assaulted or mistreated, that everyone, like the principal also is a mandated reporter, the nurse when you get to the hospital. So oftentimes, and I'm learning more about that, that there should never just be one. And when we see or hear about those stories about kids who fall through the cracks, it's because people, and maybe it's a culture or an understanding, well, my principal said I shouldn't be the one. The nurse should be the one who files it. And so it's passed off, not in most cases because they don't take it seriously, but they believe that next person will do their job. And then maybe the nurse is told, well, you can't file a 51A unless the principal gives you the right. And maybe the principal has to check with their direct supervisor, which I know often happens, so not sure if that's changed in the last year, but if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So whenever sexual misconduct is reported by any student in the Boston Public Schools, if it rises to the level of what we define as sexual violence, so for example, something physical has occurred, versus, for example, a comment that may have been offensive, if it's something that is characterized as possible sexual violence, then we are mandatory reporters and we file a 51A. It's less important to us who files it than that it gets filed, so we support the school to determine the appropriate person to make that filing, but we absolutely confirm that the filing was made. And at that time, Safety Services is also contacted and police as appropriate. So that is the line that we draw. If a student comes to school and discloses to a trusted adult about something that's happening at home or something that happened while traveling over the weekend, et cetera, that did not involve a Boston Public School employee or fellow student, then we also would alert authorities as appropriate.
And is there a reason in that code of conduct or that you don't also notify the authorities when it's a student that you know has risen to the violent possibility?
I thought, help me out, I'm not sure if what I said was unclear.
Well,
So
no,
if-
you're saying that if it was a student, so a student comes in on Monday, we're talking about how was your weekend, something said that makes the teacher feel like maybe something's wrong, or whatever reason, right? There's a million ways you can assume a child needs your support and help, that's when you reach out to outside authorities only if it happens outside of the school day or not when the students are at school?
No. So anything that rises to the level of an allegation of sexual violence, regardless of where it occurs, whether it's BPS student on BPS student is the allegation, or whether it's a BPS student reporting, for example, a family member or neighbor, for example, has engaged in sexual misconduct toward them. In both of those cases, we would
always
absolutely involve the appropriate authorities.
And we know with social media and even words, you don't need that sexual harassment and sexual assault is rising a lot in the bullying with the social media. So why is it never when it's not physical? If you feel the child emotionally is in a place where they feel not safe.
Yeah.
Because many students say, like, I don't feel safe going to the bathroom. They're saying on TikTok, or they sent a Snapchat that someone's going, so how come we haven't got caught up to that yet?
Yeah, so all of those are addressed. We address incidents that occur on social media every day. It's just that we are not required to report those to the Department of Children and Families or the police.
Okay. Well, I'll come back, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Louis-Jean.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia, and thank you to everyone who's offered testimony. I apologize. I have some meetings, so you'll see me duck out and then come back in. But I wanted to start with a question about the reporting that happens from students. On the BPS website, there's a link under 24/7 Respect that allows students or whomever it appears to report an instance of sexual violence, sexual assault. Where does that report go? What is if you could just walk us through, what does that look like, that reporting? If a student finds themselves strong enough and able enough to report, or a parent, what does that look like? What are the protocols?
Thank you.
And it looks like it's a BSAC document.
Yeah,
So kudos to BSAC for really, our students for taking the lead here and creating another avenue for students to feel comfortable to report assault and acts of sexual violence.
Yeah, thank you for that excellent question. It's good to see you again, Counselor. So, yes, early in my tenure, in the summer of 2016, we partnered with Boston Student Advisory Council at that time. They had been in the process of creating a website called bostonstudentrights.org that has a reporting mechanism, and we had some of their students join our staff that summer to write student-friendly descriptions of the policies of the Boston Public Schools regarding sexual misconduct and bias-based conduct, and to give students the opportunity to use that website to make reports. The overwhelming majority of reports that come to our office involving student conduct comes in the way that Ms. Katina described, that the student goes to an adult they trust. It might be mom, it might be a social worker at school, it might be the basketball coach, someone that they feel connected to, they feel respected by. That's the overwhelming majority of how students report sexual misconduct. But we do have that avenue should a student wish to submit it that way as well.
And so then what happens?
I'm sorry? Oh, and then what happens? Sure. So that website connects directly to our office and goes to our staff. So if someone does opt to use the bostonstudentrights.org reporting form, it goes directly to our office. Once we receive a report, whether it's from that website, whether it's from a call from a teacher, a call from a parent, regardless of how it comes to our office, the next steps are the same. So the next thing that happens is we want to make an immediate safety assessment. Is this a student that needs an intervention right away? So for example, they're in the same class with a student that harmed them. We're going to talk about what can we do to do our best to separate those students or whatever is appropriate in order to maintain their safety. So first things first is always safety, and obviously if they are physically harmed and need medical attention, so the safety concerns come first. The next thing that happens, if a 51A is appropriate, that is filed, as I just described to Counselor Murphy, and both sets of parents or guardians are informed. So the student who experienced the misconduct, that family is informed, and the family of the student who is accused is immediately informed. The next stage is investigation. Depending on the seriousness of the allegations, either the Office of Equity coaches someone we've trained at the school to conduct the investigation. It might be the principal, the assistant principal, the head of school, the assistant head of school, or their designee, but it's someone we have prepared to address these situations, who looks into the situation and does fact-finding. If it's a very serious case, then the Office of Equity will take that responsibility. Once the fact-finding is done, we make a determination whether there was sexual misconduct, and if so, address it consistent with BPS policy and the Code of Conduct.
Thank you. And then I guess a related question, is the document translated in other languages?
Which document?
The reporting a problem, the BSAC one?
Yes.
Okay. And then I guess relatedly, can you talk about how the 24/7 Respect program works for and how you've seen our English language learner students who experience sexual misconduct and sexual assault, and our students with disabilities, how they experience either reporting and how they experience the 24/7 Respect?
Absolutely. So 24/7 Respect, as I mentioned earlier, is our prevention program for middle schoolers and high schoolers. It is a 13-minute video that has 4 scenarios that are based on, unfortunately, real experiences that students have had of bias-based conduct and sexual misconduct. So they have a chance to watch our super talented Boston Arts Academy actors demonstrate 4 different scenarios and then discuss those scenarios and how the impact of the conduct, what might be barriers to reporting to an adult, how do you support your friend when they experience something and maybe offer to go with them to report it, how to be an upstander. The video exists entirely in English and entirely in spoken Spanish. So we have 2 versions that are one in spoken English, one in spoken Spanish. The spoken English version is captioned in, I think it's over a dozen languages. So we went above and beyond in translating the video so it's accessible to everyone possible in the Boston Public Schools, and we're also proud that it's in use in other districts across the country.
And I guess lastly on this thread, what, from your personal experience, so that's good in terms of like practicality, but from your personal experience, how do you see different groups that are, you know, marginalized, either students with disabilities, you know, students from different cultural backgrounds, students who are not, where English isn't their native language, how do you see them experiencing reporting and the life cycle of their report of sexual misconduct to your office? Like, what are the gaps? Where are we falling short?
So on the one hand, I think we've made strides in making this information accessible to as many of our students as possible.
And just to be clear, like the information is an important part, and that's half, probably more than half the battle. But on the side of, okay, now that you've experienced, like, do you see a difference in the level of reporting, or like the groups that are underreported, and what can we be doing to do better? Because obviously,
Yes.
if, you know, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things that's incredibly challenging about doing this type of work, which I've been doing for a long time, both at BPS and prior, is when we look at numbers of reports, how do we know if this is good news or bad news? Like, so for example, if we see the number of reports of concerns go up one year to the next, is that something to be celebrated because we're reporting more frequently, or is that something to be lamented because, oh no, we're having more misconduct going on? So it's a tricky thing to figure out how to measure progress. That being said, what we do know is that the requests to assistance to the Office of Equity have gone up geometrically during my tenure. So this year, in terms of total requests for assistance, so this is by no means, the majority of this is not related to sexual misconduct, but we've had over 2,000 calls to the Office of Equity this year for formal requests for assistance. So folks know we exist. I would love to have more people know that we exist, and I certainly welcome ideas from counselors, from students, from parents, from our partners who are clinicians in our community, about other ways to get the word out, because it is in the best interest of every member of our community for our students and families to know that we are here to support them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. So I'm going to just ask a few questions, and then probably have a question for everybody here. So, you know, Assistant Superintendent Schuster, you know, there was an incident at my daughter's school. They were in the playground, you know, during recess, and she talked about somebody slapping her butt. And, you know, it was one of those situations where, you know, kids are joking, but, you know, I have taught her that any touch is inappropriate, regardless if it's in gesture or playing around, right? So I'm just curious about when you hear about incidences that are reported, can you talk to me a little bit about some of those things that you may not think are a big deal, but if they go unaddressed and the behavior is not addressed, that they will escalate to something more? Can you just talk to me about kind of what that looks like?
No, it's a great question. And we get calls to our office every day about that type of situation, and we take it very seriously. Obviously, the age of the students, the intent, the context, that slap on the behind can mean something very different depending on the context, right? But anything that happens without consent matters, because we don't want any student, either the one who received that unwanted touch or witnessed that unwanted touch or made that unwanted touch, we don't want any of those students to leave that moment thinking that's okay, thinking that they're allowed to, that they have permission somehow implicitly to touch one another without permission. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of a situation where, yes, we're going to address it in the immediate moment, we're going to have the conversations with the class, but that's one where we would tend to recommend to the school to call Susie Spresser, because she would then coach the teacher, provide some lessons about consent that are age appropriate depending on the grade level where that incident occurred. And let's not just say knock it off, let's go a step further and teach our students about consent. I don't believe that it's in our students' best interest to allow them to engage in that behavior nor to experience it. They're all our kids, every single one of them, the one who made that slap and the one who received it, and we want to ensure that they get the information they need to understand the impact of that kind of misconduct.
Thank you. Katina, you still with us? All right, I'm gonna go to you in a second, so if you're still with us and you can hear me, get ready, you're gonna be coming next. So I'm gonna go to Dr. Crum-Swaby. If you could just talk to us a little bit about kind of the social and emotional impact that when a young person finally has the courage to speak. And
I am here.
Oh, good. So I'm going to give Dr. Crum-Swaby an opportunity to, I'm going to ask Dr. Crum-Swaby to hold on. I'm going to go to Katina, okay? So Katina, I'm not sure if you got to hear the example that I shared in regards to what my daughter reported to me one day about being slapped.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I heard you.
So I would love to hear from you as a parent when you learned that, that your daughter shared with you what happened to her. Can you just kind of walk me through what it was like for you to hear that information from your daughter as opposed from the administration? Because that, again, was my experience. I heard it from my daughter. No one called me. I didn't get an email. No one said, hey, FYI, this happened. If your daughter gets home, these are the things that you need to be mindful of. She may have experienced X, Y, and Z, and as a result of that might be in a particular mood. There was no warning at all. So, Katina, can you kind of walk me through your experience as a parent about kind of what that was like for you?
Certainly. My daughter basically came home maybe 3 weeks before that one day, and I noticed she was not herself. But she moved on past that. And when she finally did decide to go and tell an adult within the school, I was hoping that that was something that I would have known. I really believed that if something like that happened within the school system or within any of the facilities that she's being educated, that I would immediately get a call from someone. It was really disturbing that it took my daughter to come home, and my daughter sat with me and she explained the incident to me. And I will share a little bit of the incident itself with you. They were in a restricted area. They went into a restricted area and my daughter said, we shouldn't be here. According to her at that point, the young man grabbed her and she's like, let me go. I want to go to class. I want to go to class. And he started to grope and grab and reach down in her pants. And she's like, I want to go to class. And she said it must have hit him because she started to, cry. And finally, she ran away from the young man after he slammed her against the wall. One of the biggest problems that I found in the whole thing, and the most disturbing thing, where were the adults in this building? How does something like this, that is that vile, happen, and at no point in that whole incident is there one adult that is present? No security. No, you don't expect that from teachers. Teachers are in the classrooms teaching. They can't be security as well. But I just remember thinking, where were the adults? From there, of course, I was very upset, and I was in tears, and of course, I called my family members, and I was upset. A friend of my daughter's was very, very upset. And basically, the young man disappeared for roughly a week from school. not by the hand of the school itself. That was self-imposed, that he vanished for a week. And then he came back to school and life went on like nothing ever happened. My daughter or I were asked to come in. There was no discussion. There was no nothing. Life just went back on like nothing happened, even to the point where my daughter is in the same biology class as this boy. So she stopped going. So she probably is not going to pass biology because she doesn't go, because she knows he might be there. The school's aware of all of these things. It just felt like there was no consequence for anything. That, his parents, they told my daughter, well, his parents were contacted, and then he has self-imposed consequences. What does that mean? Now, they told me that in a meeting at the end of last week. He has because he's gonna feel bad for the rest of his life. And I had to point out to an administrator in the school, you do know that sexual assault is a criminal act, correct? And they kind of just looked at me. It's just the way the entire incident was handled was not appropriate. And my daughter felt, and still to some degree feels, unsupported. And the only reason why she is okay to go into that school is because she knows I'm right behind her, basically. And I think in that meeting on Friday, they understood that if only by our grace is that young man not, wasn't detained or arrested. I was like, so the least you can do is make sure that he has some consequences, because I understand children make mistakes, but that's a major mistake that my daughter's gonna carry with her for the rest of her life. So for him to face absolutely no consequences, and then on top of it, escalate my daughter to the status of a liar. Although, again, I told you, we have an entire text exchange where he was apologizing profusely and things of that nature. But my daughter doesn't even feel comfortable walking around the school because people talk and it's a hard situation for her. But because of what she wants to do with her life, she doesn't want to leave the school.
Yeah, thank you.
I can't say what that is. Yeah, because that would kind of be a dead giveaway.
Yeah,
basically.
so I think you, without saying, have given us some insight to the situation specifically at hand here. And Katina, I also just want to again thank you for being so forthcoming, because to have to say that again and relive it, even in this space, it is, I know as a parent, not the easiest thing to do. So just wanted to say thank you for giving us a little bit more insight and perspective to your journey with that.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you. I'm going to go now to Dr. Crump-Swaby. My question was really about kind of, if you could just walk us through what the social and emotional impact it is when you report something and there is, in your mind, right, the appropriate response to take care of you has been neglected. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, not just in the immediate, but kind of like the long-term impact? Because we have to recognize that what we're doing to our children or not doing to our children, while it's just K through 12, we have to recognize that this is a long time, it'll have a lifetime impact beyond. And so I just want to name that as the scars will run deep. So I'm going to ask you to talk about that. And Mr. Johnson, I'm going to ask you to, when it's your turn, just so you can get ready to answer this question, you might want to dig through your files, but would love to just get some numbers in terms of if you happen to have, I know between you and Superintendent Schuster, would love to kind of understand kind of like what the intersection is between BPS and BPS safety, and kind of like how do you all support each other once you get word of something that has happened, kind of the role that BPS public safety plays with helping to facilitate that. So I'm just giving you the heads up that that's going to be a question I'm going to ask you, so you can marinate on it. So when I come to you, but I'm going to go now to Dr. Crumswaby.
So in response to your question and just hearing and listening to Katina's playback of what her daughter experienced, I would imagine that for her it was just as traumatic hearing it as it was for her daughter to experience it. So what we're talking about is the trauma that her daughter experienced and the vicarious trauma that she experienced from just hearing that particular experience that her daughter has experienced, that event that her daughter has experienced. So what we are talking about is what are the long-term effects of that? So in the short term, I think we heard Katina really speak to what those short-term responses was. She talked about, 3 weeks prior to really finding out, seeing the shift in her daughter's persona and how she showed up at home. That's some level of evidence that this experience had impacted her daughter not only physically but emotionally and mentally in how she was showing up in her own home space, right? And it's great that she has a mother that she can be open to and share that experience with, and a mother who is also an advocate as well, because it could have gone in any different direction where, if there's a mother who doesn't feel safe enough to go to the school officials to get the help or to advocate for her daughter, then they both would have been sitting in that space and that traumatic experience. So what we have is the impact of the physical, emotional, mental, and even her own sexuality and her sexual development. So that's the way in which the trauma impacts. So it doesn't just happen in the mind, it just doesn't happen externally in the body, it happens internally. And, as Ms. Katina mentioned, her daughter, she wants to stay in that environment. However, it's affecting her academics as well, right? So that's the other piece. So her whole persona have been impacted, and not only from the physical, the mental, the emotional, it's also impacting her academics. So what does that do over a long period of time? If it goes unaddressed in many different ways, many different aspects, not just unaddressed where she doesn't get an opportunity to speak to it or to process it, but if the adults in her life chooses not to as well, find a way to address it, then she takes on that burden of feeling that there's something she must have done wrong. And what happens with that is that she carries that burden along, and that can additionally affect, again, like I said, her own sexual development as she grows older. Because as we know, as I stated in my beginning testimony, that sexual health is something positive that we should all cultivate in a positive way. But when something gets in and attack it in a way that leaves anyone feeling as though there's something wrong with them, then it impacts as they grow into adulthood if it's not addressed and if it's not taken care of. So it needs to happen simultaneously, where the school is addressing it to show her and to say, we did hear you, we do know that it's having a great impact on you, and this is what we're going to do to address it. And then also she would need to be able to process that, as well with her mother and the family as well, because it has impacted not only the whole family, it's also impacting the school community as well.
Thank you for that. And I'm gonna go to Mr. Johnson, and then we're gonna move on to our next panel, because I just wanna make sure that we're mindful of time, including me. I should be timing myself, even though I said I wasn't going to do that here, but Mr. Johnson, as you just it would just be in, Katina, before I move on to Mr. Johnson, this will be a yes or no, just because in the interest of just kind of moving things along. I'm curious of whether or not you filed a report. Okay, I'll come back to you, Katina. Mr. Johnson. Oh, Katina, did you file a report?
I did not file a report. I am basically, just let me say, I am talking with my daughter about what she wants to do. I explained to her what it is to file a report and go to the police about sexual assault, what a trial will look like, what happens in court. If she feels does she feel that strongly that she's willing to stand up to that? Not saying that she's wrong, just saying, explaining the court proceedings and what comes along with that. Yeah. I also wanted to say to the mental health provider there,
yes,
she has a good support system, and number one in me. I have given her, we are going to be having her go to the Rape Crisis Center. We did get a number for that, so that she can get some group support as well as some individual therapy. And also, Mom is a survivor as well. So Mom is very versed on what this looks like. So mercifully for my daughter, she has a good foundation and a good support system, but I worry about the children in the system that don't have a mother who's been through something similar in her life, or a parent that cares enough to take the steps that needs to be taken. And there's a lot of them, unfortunately. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Katina. I really do appreciate you staying with us and being so generous with your journey. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Johnson, I've given you probably like 30 minutes to think about that question. Bring it.
Thank you. I'll be brief and hopefully thorough. When this is reported to one of our staff members of our department, usually come from a staff member at one of the schools by somebody assigned to that school, or they'll call our office directly. At that time, we'll take minimal information from them, then have them, give them advice to do a 51A and to contact the equity department if they already haven't done that. At that time, we'll call again and talk with the Boston Police School Unit, who have an officer who does reports for that. Contact her, give her the information. She will do the Boston Police report, and then all those reports are confidential. So then it will get it forwarded to the Crimes Against Children Unit, which I think Lieutenant Driscoll is here and can speak on that later. As far as the investigation, we don't do any investigation at all. That's on the Crimes Against Children and the equity if they do it. We'll assist them if they ask if needed, but we don't do any investigation with those reports. As far as the school discipline, we can make suggestions to them, but it's up to the school and the administration what discipline they do at the schools.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. I know that my colleague has some follow-up questions, and then we're going to move on to our next panel, and then I do have a follow-up too. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is for you. No pressure if you don't want to answer this, but
The role, we know, and it's been talked about a lot, that the role of the school safety officers have changed. And also the ability of our Boston Police Department, who I know as a school teacher for many years had a very positive relationship with many schools. Many of them are coaches and a strong connection with the staff at the school also. And they're not allowed in our schools anymore. Have you seen a change in the behavior or the more incidents of violence at our schools since those two roles have changed? And also reporting of incidents at schools, have you seen a change in there where?
I would have to look at like the numbers, but I know that, I think it has an effect on everyone as the COVID situation and the lost time at school, I think has affected everyone and a lot of the students. I work with the BPD every day. I talk with them and go over things at schools, and we do the best we can as far as the collaboration and, making sure everyone's safe and pointing out areas of concerns.
Thank you. And one question about safety transfers. So we know that if there's a victim, but in this case, like we'll use Katina because she's been brave to share in her daughter's case, if they don't follow through all of the, reports and all, but I've always said the victim should always be the first one to be able to choose. Are they staying at the school they're at, or do they want to go to a different school? And could you talk us through that? And are they always allowed? Because I've heard a lot of times when they feel like it's not allowed, or the victim has to stay. There's just not always that easy. Yes, we'll make this work to make sure that you feel safe.
Yeah, I don't know if Deputy Superintendent would like to speak about safety transfers because he has deeper expertise than I do. But in my experience, in instances where the Office of Equity has communicated a request for a safety transfer for a student, assuming that the family is in agreement with the student that this would be what is best for their child, then as long as there's a demonstrated safety issue, we will find an open seat for them in the Boston Public Schools.
Right, but on the other hand, if they want to stay and the family's really strongly saying, like in this case, this daughter, she might not be passing her science class because she doesn't feel safe going to class. So like how much needs to be reported, or how much do we need to know to then have the perpetrator transferred?
Yeah, so in terms of having the student who's accused transferred, that's a complex issue because of their rights under the law and our efforts to thwart the school to prison pipeline. So our obligation is first to the student who's experienced the misconduct and to give them the opportunity for a safety transfer if they don't feel safe at school. In terms of the individual who is accused, there is not, under the code of conduct, an involuntary transfer is not an acceptable
And so
response.
we can assume, or we know that that's setting up the victim to then, after being assaulted, they then have to leave their friends and their teachers and their community, and if they were lucky enough to be at a school that is, performing well and near their house, that they have to move.
It's such that is one of those that whenever it happens where we have a family that expresses that concern, that's one of those heartbreaking situations where we don't have any winners.
But would it take the family, because you mentioned, Doctor, that many times the mom or dad aren't in a position to advocate for their children?
Yeah,
And so wouldn't it be the school system
Absolutely.
standing up for this child?
Yes.
Not waiting to see if the parent is able to?
Yes, and I've seen that multiple times with schools going to great lengths to do the right thing by that child. And often, I'm happy to say, in many circumstances, we're able to develop a safety plan that the student and the family feels really good about. Many of our schools are large enough that, for example, it's possible to have separate classes. It's even possible, I'm remembering a safety plan that we did this year where we literally had the 2 students assigned to different entrances to the building each morning. So we will go to every length we can, separate lunch period, you know, every single thing we can do to maintain safety.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Councilor Murphy, for bringing that to light, because I do think that it is re-traumatizing to have to every single day. And I think there's something to be said with understanding the rights of others, right? And I do appreciate that. But I think as a system, we really need to start thinking about what restorative justice looks like in ways that do not further harm the victim, right? I think that we need to find that balance as we continue to navigate through this. So I know that Councilor Louis-Jean is in between meetings and will probably pop back in, but I would like to move on to the second panel. I know Fran Johnson's like, yeah, I treated you good today, right? I didn't yell at you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm gonna ask our second panel to make their way here. We have our esteemed youth mental health ambassador, Maya McNeil. We are also joined by Dr. Jackman. Sam DePina, please make your way to the chamber. As well as Captain Hussein, who is already seated in his spot, so thank you. And before we officially begin our next panel, I really wanted to quickly set the stage that this hearing order was really inspired by a hearing that we hosted in July of 2020. And in that hearing, the hearing was about restorative justice and school safety and our students. And we heard from various students in that panel about issues of sexual assault going unaddressed. And it was then that we were inspired to file a hearing order on this. And as a result of what we learned over the last few months here in the city of Boston as it relates to sexual misconduct and issues around feeling safe in our schools, we decided that it was time for us to accelerate having the hearing this year early on because we wanted to address it. And so I just would like to ask Central staff to play the first, we have 2 testimonies, and I really want to center us again in why we're here today. So I'm going to begin with that, so we can roll tape.
Said, man, this is why I hate you all, and I hate this program,
That's
and this
not
makes
it.
me feel depressed.
I'm sorry, I don't think we have the right
timestamp.
timestamp. I believe we shared the timestamp with Carrie Asla. Do you want to just tell us what the timestamp is so that we can fast forward to it?
It's 3:30.
It's 3:30?
00. Yeah.
3:30:00. That is the timestamp. Candace, we may want to fast forward to. Thank you.
That one. Yeah. Well, the girl. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And how there's talk of implementing that at my school. So thank you for that example. But I heard a testimony earlier about why we shouldn't get rid of police in our schools and of how police are consoling children within our schools. Though their intention is to de-escalate tensions within our schools, their impact has created tensions or this mindset within our students that we are criminals and that we are the issue. Their impact is that they're guidance counselors and that we need more guidance counselors. Why not
Okay.
train more teachers with this
Let
intention
me-
that
I don't
we
think
are also
that's
that we are
it
also holding this
either.
expectation of them. We already are taught by our teachers. We already have this trust and connection with them, but yet they're
All right. I'm sorry, Candace. I have in my notes here, let's go to 33810, please. Because I don't think that was it.
Other resources that would help us feel more comfortable. Thank you for your time.
Ekron, thank you very much. Next, Jimmy, are you with us yet? We're going to go to Fiona, and then we'll go to Marlise. Fiona, unmute yourself. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember her.
Okay, hi,
This
my name
the
is
one.
Fiona. I'm from District 1, East Boston. I appreciate that this hearing is taking place, but it's, again, overdue. I am now 21 years old, and I'm still going through the Boston education system on a college level. I remember police being a part of my educational experience from before I was 10. I don't remember much from elementary school, but what I do remember is being a little girl. Kids under the age of 10 experiencing safety and solidarity with each other, not the police. Many of us already experiencing sexual assault, pedophilia, domestic abuse, substance abuse, most times in secondary experiences. We have family members, violence and death in our streets, parental loss, and fear of the immigration/carceral state. All to say that then to go to a middle school that was in the process of de-gang affiliation was super traumatic. I went to the Umana, which was mentioned multiple times here, which I'm glad things have changed. But from my experience, police were heavily surveilling us by patrolling our hallways. And in my middle school, we had glass walls so the administration and police could watch us while we learned. And I felt like we were doing something wrong, even though we weren't. And many students who were 10 or 11 at the time, who got into conflict, just really needed help. Like, if you knew the situation, people just needed help. And kids were getting into petty fights because they couldn't express or articulate what was bothering them. And many of the fights started from small, insensitive jokes and escalated into students getting triggered by their traumas and other conflict that was going on in their lives. Police were not the ones we asked for help from. Who were we supposed to tell about family members being shot, friends overdosing, domestic abuse, friends being raped by 30-year-old men, and so many more problems? I'm gonna tell you right now, the answer was not the police. It wasn't the officers in our school. And my friends and myself used to laugh about how we'd be in jail or dead or pregnant at 16 as 11-year-olds. And that is, I literally look back at that now and I'm like, yo, that's so sad and upsetting. And the truth is like, I look back and I'm like, why were there police in our schools? They didn't add safety. They didn't support us. And so I really questioned that. And then I was really privileged to be able to go to an exam school, BLA. My guidance counselor was your sister, Counselor Asabi. And everyone had essentially said to me that was in my middle school before that I was gonna be able to live longer and be more successful because of that. And they were right. Like, kids know that resources matter. And the fact that me getting into this exam school was gonna determine a change in my life that was going to make it longer. It's so sad that 10-year-olds know this fact. And so it wasn't because of an addition of police, it was an addition of resources that made it possible for me to be at where I am today at a college level going to UMass Boston. And even then, police are still used to threaten Black and brown students at my university. So it speaks to a bigger principle of patterns of abuse by the police, because when I did get to
the part that we wanted to hear around specifically, she mentioned incidences of sexual assault, rape, and talked a little bit about kind of how young people were feeling, right? That they really didn't have trusted adults. It seemed like that they can go to share what was happening for them. And then there was another video. We're not gonna go screening through all of these videos because I didn't have I don't have the time. But I know there was another one that really talked specifically about some of the sexual assault and harassment that went unaddressed. And this was a hearing that I filed, but Counselor then Asabi George was the chair of education then, and was a big advocate around mental health and wellness and having more social workers and providers to support students. So I just want to thank her and acknowledge the work that she's done to get us more support. So I just kind of wanted to regroup us in what led us here, which is some of the things that we learned in 2020. And these things are still happening, right? There are a lot of things that are being underreported, not reported, folks feeling like their voices are not being heard or their stories are not being told. And I think that that's what we're really trying to get a grasp of here, so that we can figure out how can we repair the harm and what do we need to do moving forward. So I'm going to go to our second panel, and thank you again to our first panel for being here. I'm happy to know that Katina is still riding along with us, just in case we bring you back into the mix, that you're still listening in. But I'm gonna start off with Maya.
Resource-rich environment.
To help set us off, so leading with some of the youth voices. Maya, I know you have some remarks, and you just want to, we want to welcome you into the space.
Thank you, Counselor. So first, I just want to say that I appreciate everybody coming to this hearing today and being able to sit on such a sensitive topic. I also appreciate everyone coming here to share a part of themselves, and if you decide not to share anything or say anything, just know that your presence is acknowledged. I am more than grateful to be here, not only for me to say something, but to hear what everybody else says. This is just such a sensitive topic, like I said before, but it's super important that we raise awareness for things like this that happen in our school community. So I have friends who have been sexually assaulted, and one of my friends, I will not say their name or the school that they attend for the confidentiality of them, but one of my friends was sexually assaulted by someone that attended the school, but it happened outside the school. And it takes everybody, you know, their own pace to say something to a trusted adult, and it took them some time, but they shared with a staff member at the school what had happened, and that staff member did not say anything to higher authority to report the incident or say anything to the parents. It took the staff member about 3 weeks to finally say something to higher authority. And then once that had happened, obviously they took procedure to investigate the problem, whatever the case may be. But the person who had sexually assaulted my friend was still in the school for about a month. So with that being said, I'm just wondering, and you do not have to answer this, but I'm wondering if all schools have a sexual assault training for teachers, that if they're put in that position. This should include, if anything is reported, there's mandatory investigation on this issue, because anybody that is touched inappropriately will not feel safe, and everybody reacts differently. With this being said, I am also a part of the Mental Health Ambassador Program, so I'm able to partake in conversations around these sensitive topics with having an understanding of what mental health toll it takes on students. So when things are not being reported and a student tells a trusted adult and nothing is happening, this can lead to depression, anxiety, you know, PTSD, whatever the case may be. So it's declining students' mental health. They're not coming to school, like one problem happens and then it's 50 after that because nothing is taking place. My next thought process is, how can we do better as a community to make space for our youth to feel okay talking about this? Because this is such a sensitive topic. So, you know, how can we make space for kids to feel okay coming to somebody saying anything? You know, when the right procedures aren't taking place and teachers aren't doing anything, then, you know, students are never going to feel safe saying anything at all. And also with that, so when these traumatic events happen and the right procedures aren't taking place and it's just swept under the rug, you know, how do you expect students to come into school where they're supposed to get their education, but on the other hand, they're so worried about, you know, who might be the next person to do this to me or do this to my friend. So, yes, that's all I have to say. Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Maya. I'm beaming here with pride Thank you. You know, like, I think when we see young people being fully expressed, we need to acknowledge and continue to celebrate that. So thank you for bringing your voice and uplifting the voices of young people. Really do appreciate it. I'm gonna move on now to, I know, Sam, you were not here to do remarks, so you don't have to. I'm just gonna ask some questions when it's your turn. And Captain Hussein, I am gonna ask if you can just, not just here for questions, but just at some point help us understand kind of what the reporting process looks like from BPD's side of things, kind of like how you all liaison with the Boston Public Schools. So those are the sort of things that I'm gonna want you to talk about. And then Dr. Jackman, I know you work in the schools. I know you used to work in the schools, and you have worked in many different ways alongside me in different spaces and places. So all things that deal with trauma, alongside with Dr. Crump-Swaby, we've been in this, you know, as parents, even before we came into this chamber, right? So would love to also, as you share your remarks, to really kind of help our audience really understand kind of what that looks like in terms of when you hear something, how you help support the school in addressing some of these issues. So I'm going next to, thank you. We find out Captain Hussein is rolling around here like he owns my chamber. Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's a safe space.
Don't you guys feel good?
You've created a nice safe space.
Do we feel like do you feel the intentionality of what we're trying to do here?
I feel the love.
Okay, good. As long as that's on the record, and I will keep replaying. So I'm gonna go next to Dr. Jackman. You've been listening in, you've heard from Katina, you've heard from Mai, you've heard from BPS. You know, we'd just love for you to kind of spend some of your time, and I'm glad to see that, Councilor Louis-Jean, you're just coming back to the second panel, so we're just getting started, so you're right on time. Dr. Jackman, if you kind of want to, the floor is yours.
Take it away, thank you. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I will start by sharing, and for just convening in this way as well. So I'll share a little bit of my role so people understand kind of the different lenses that I bring to this topic. So I come as a child psychologist with over 30 years. I know I look pretty young. 30 years in the field. So I bring that. I worked 17 years as an educator in Boston Public Schools. Initially as a clinician through a partner program at Children's Hospital, and then in a leadership role in a school. Also trained as a forensic psychologist and worked in juvenile court clinics where I did evaluations for youth involved with DCF and with the court system. So I bring that lens and having to see cases like that from that perspective. As a licensed psychologist, I'm a mandated reporter, and I'm a parent of a middle schooler and a third grader, not in Boston, but so, you know, as I listen to all the different perspectives and testimonies, I just really want to add my lens in terms of thinking about how we move systems forward and how we think about integrating trauma-informed practices into topics around sexual assault and harassment. I don't think it's anything necessarily earth-shattering, but I think it's worth saying and speaking out loud. So as we think about students and thinking about a prevention lens, it's really important to hold a developmental perspective. So as little babies, how are we talking to children about their bodies, about consent, about body boundaries, and about touch? Right? These are really important conversations. And when we talk about silence, if children don't understand their bodies or their temples and to be protected, then it's very easy for people to take advantage of that lack of knowledge and that gap in knowledge. So having a developmental perspective, again, from as young, talking about our bodies, our consent, even when we have kids and we're tickling kids, are we asking permission, right? Or are we just using our will on little children's bodies. And when they say stop, do we stop or do we keep tickling, right? So there are ways in which we communicate in very subtle and some way explicit ways that we're not respecting children's boundaries and body boundaries. Working in a high school, I know Susie's here, so in our school we had the comprehensive sexual health program, which I think is really important. Again, that's a program that emphasizes consent and boundaries for young people. So again, how are we teaching children to have a language, particularly as we're adolescents, how are they understanding their bodies and respecting the bodies of other people who they may be attracted to. I think some of the barriers that I saw in my role was how do we fit in comprehensive sexual curriculum into a curriculum that's already packed with other stuff. So it's not a core, it's often an add-on, right? Or it's a squeeze in here or there, right? So how do we really think about this through a lens where this is an important and core to the whole education of our children? And then I would add the other piece in thinking about prevention, and I know there's been a lot of more focus on it more recently, but social emotional learning. And so again, thinking about how we help teach children to assert their boundaries, how to assert when people violate those boundaries, how to communicate with their peers and with adults when those boundaries have been violated. So again, that social awareness, that body awareness, that self-awareness, those are all skills that we address in social emotional learning. I think there have been some questions about teacher training, and I will speak to that next. I do think it's really important that teachers understand how to take disclosures from young people. And I know Beth, and I forgot her name, so excuse me. But how do we think about our training and then the application? And I will be honest, and I'll say, in my role, I often train teachers. And even so, we talked about their roles as mandated reporters and who they're supposed to report to. And it would never fail that someone would take a report and not say anything. They would not share, or they would hold on to it and they would come out in this random and you needed to tell me this at the minute you heard it, right? So that was definitely a frustration that, as an administrator in the school, I dealt with on a day-to-day. I think the other thing that came up in my role in the schools is the reports don't often come out verbally. And one of the things that came out, some of the programming that we had in our school, students were writing memoirs. And so there are ways in which memoirs were often the first time young people would report having experienced sexual assault, whether in childhood or something more recent. And so we actually work with our teachers to include, again, because the other piece that I'm going to address, talk about trust, right? So a lot of the reason we have silence is because there's a lack of trust. And so we really worked with teachers to increase transparency in what would happen if you share something that happened to you in a written assignment, that there was going to be a responsibility for the teacher to report that to an administrator. So being really upfront about that, and included it in their syllabus. As I love Dr. Gill's testimony. You're amazing. She talked about her 4 S's, right, of silence, shame, secrecy, and stigma. And I would add the 5th S, which really impacts trust, is systems. And so we have systems where people don't trust our systems, whether it's DCF, and I will hear this constantly from young people. If I report something, I'm going to be taken away from my home. Yes. Or are there immigration issues, right? So, and schools, right, are have been systems of mistrust. So we do have to acknowledge that these systems really, in many ways, contribute and perpetuate the silence and why young people don't share things that happen to them. I'll just briefly, I know my time is probably up, so briefly talk about just the impact on learning in terms of when people have experienced a trauma, it really just impacts learning. We can go, that's a whole nother thing, but just trust my word for it. As you think about rebuilding trust, I really want to think about what are the trauma-informed processes and practices that we can have. One of my frustrations in a role where I was often one of the first people to receive a report from a young person of some sexual assault or harassment, it was the system. I don't think it is really trauma-informed. And it was something that I struggled with as a clinician and balancing my roles as an administrator. So what often happens is if I receive a report, I have to kind of get as much information as I can, and then I would go to my next level, which would be a dean, and I would have to share that information, and then the school police would get involved, and then the Boston police. And so sometimes the youth might have to share that information with different people. You know, my role is to try to get that as much information as possible, which also felt really uncomfortable for me in some ways because it meant them telling me a lot of information that I know they're going to have to be retelling to other people. And to me, it doesn't, again, thinking about, particularly for older children or older youth, who sometimes did not want this to be reported, they're maybe above 16 years old, and really feeling powerless then, like they no longer own their story or have agency in how they want their story to be rolled out. And so, I know there's a process, and I forget what the initials stand for, but for sexual assault for children, there's a process called the SANE interview, and if anyone knows what the initials stand for, if you can share with me. But really what it is the child is interviewed once behind a, what do you call it, those mirrors, where a double-sided mirror?
Yeah.
And so there's one evaluator who's asking the questions, and then people are behind this mirror who can then feed the questions to the other person. But it means that the child is only interviewed one time. And so again, as you thinking about a trauma-informed process, as you think about why young people may be silent about bringing their stories forward sooner, is because you do have a process that's not really trauma-informed.
Thank you. You almost ready? You have one more point?
One, just going to wrap up. Thank you for being polite in this process. So my recommendation is just, I think having high-quality trained clinicians is really important. It was really unusual for me, a doctoral level psychologist, to be in a school. And I think I did bring my different lenses, which helped. But I also had some other clinicians who I consulted with. So doing this work in isolation can also be very risky. So who do clinicians have to consult with when they're faced with a disclosure? How do they kind of work that through? Because we often have our own traumas, and that can limit our perspective and how we respond to situations. Having supervision of clinicians and our training of our safety personnel in mental health practices. I have witnessed safety personnel kind of escalating situations and increasing violence in schools. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Jackman. Really do appreciate all the wisdom that you brought into the space. And I know I'm going to have a few questions for you in regards to the trauma-informed practices or lack thereof that we need to, as a system, because that's the other S that we need to add to the S's, Dr. Crump-Swaby. So I'm going to go next to Sam, Mr. DePina. If you could just briefly, I know you weren't prepared here to say remarks, but anything that you've heard so far that you want to react to, and then I'm going to go to Captain Hussein to just kind of talk to me about the reporting and the relationship between BPS and BPD and what that looks like on the other end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just open my thanking you and Councilor Murphy for hosting this hearing today and letting us be in the space to hear the concerns and to hear the dialogue and learn from what we take out of here and take some action and get better at the work that we do around this. So just appreciative of the opportunity, happy to share what we do and learn from kind of what some of the experiences of our constituents are and have been to make better decisions going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Captain Hussein, this is where I feel, and make sure you speak into the mic, that way we can hear you loud and clear, okay? This is where I think there's an opportunity for those who are tuning in to really understand kind of the relationship between BPD and the Boston Public School Safety and kind of what it looks like when you hear of a sexual assault or harassment. Just help us understand what the protocols, procedures are, and what your role is.
So initially, safety service will inform one of the school police officers that we have an incident. We've got a female officer that will take the report. If it rises, in the officer's opinion, to something that is sexual, then the supervisor is notified and crimes against children is called in. Sergeant Detective Harris is here. She can speak to that component when her detectives come in and how they process the incident from there. If it's a rape, Lieutenant Detective Driscoll can talk about how his detectives will proceed forth there. But the relationship is good with safety service. It can always get better. And in this transitional phase, we've got a new superintendent coming. We've got a new commissioner coming. And with the new mayor and her commitment to rebuilding the schools, I think we're going to be in a great place come September. But procedure-wise, rule-wise, Mass General Law-wise, and I provided that to you. The officers have an outline of what needs to be done. Supervisors notified, crimes against children is notified, sexual assaults notified, and we proceed through a checklist of what needs to be done so that the safety of the child is our main concern.
And this is information that I'm going to assume is public, right? So that
Yes,
folks,
yes.
everyone.
That's correct.
Every-
They can
everybody
go on-
should know this.
They can go on our website. And one of the things, safety service and the school police unit, going forward, working with a nonprofit called Strategies for Youth, is educating our young men and women on what they can and can't do, what the laws are. There's so many things these kids just don't know. And I think it's important for us to educate them on how to navigate as they get older.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I'm going to move to questions from my colleagues, and then we're going to open up for public testimony. I also have questions, but I want my colleagues who have been so patient.
No, thank you.
Councilor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. So Maya, thank you for that. It's always wonderful to have the youth voice. And I appreciate that you were not just lifting up your own voice and your want and your, you deserve the safety, but you were also speaking about your peers. So I appreciate that. So thank you. And when you were talking about the proper training, I often say that I'm happy and we can applaud when we talk about adding more nurses and adding more social workers or adding more teachers. But we can't expect them to be miracle workers if we're not giving them the proper training. So when in the last few years, and I applaud our former colleague, Councilor Sabi George, that she really knew that there was a need and added the more nurses and social workers. But now when you talk about the systems change, the school department now needs to make sure that we're giving them the proper training. And if that is, it should include all of it, right? Sexual assault training, mental health training, trauma-informed teacher training, that should also be for our staff. I said it with the first panel, I'll say it again. We are never given that proper training as teachers with all of these important things. And as a parent, I also know that when you talked about like sex ed or all of these other important things, it's an add-on. It's the gym teacher, and maybe the boys get it the first week in April, and then the girls will get the class the last week, and the mom gets the call, you sign the form, and it's not the same as, you know, really teaching it as a curriculum. And I do want to mention how my colleague here and we have filed, and we'll have a hearing soon on, we really would love to have mental health as a curriculum in the BPS system, that not just something, if needed, we talk about, that it's starting in kindergarten. And just touch on the stories you were talking about and how it's not always someone coming forward. It could be they wrote it in a letter, you saw a note in the bathroom, or it was an assignment. Most of my years in BPS, I was a kindergarten teacher, so for many children, and for the families, if it was their oldest child, that was the first experience they had in the school system, which we know is a government agency. So there were times when kids were drawing pictures or talking about things, and so we I don't think we do a bad job. We have to do a better job, though, at making sure families know that as a teacher or a school, if we see that the family could need more services, that it's not something they should be hiding, or the kid should feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be talking anymore. And it is that fine line you mentioned, that if it's an older child, you can put it in your syllabus, but you want to make sure as a teacher that your students trust you and your families trust you. So those relationships also, all the way up the line. Because it's frustrating when you hear that a teacher says, well, the principal said this, or a principal says, I'm not getting support from above me. So definitely glad we added the S to that list of important things we need to work on. So no specific questions, but just those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Louis-Jean.
Thank you, everyone, for everything that you brought to the panel, and I apologize again for those who I didn't hear in full. It's just been a bit of a balancing act. I do have one question at the moment for the captain. I'm curious as to the training that we give our police officers in order to deal with these issues of sexual assault and sexual misconduct, and to ensure that they're able to show up and respond to these calls with, the empathy and compassion necessary to be effective. Where do they get their training?
So most officers get this training, the line officers, the officers that respond, get this training at the academy.
From whom?
From the academy staff. And the academy staff.
So from other police officers?
Correct. And we've got a really good group. We bring in physicians to supplement our training. So at the academy, they get a well-rounded empathy, social interaction training there. The school police unit, those officers that deal with safety services, they, at the Mass Training Council, they're certified as SROs, school resource officers. And I'm not familiar, I just got in this role in the last couple of months, so I haven't been through the SRO. I'm scheduled to go during the summer months, but they get a comprehensive, I think it's a month worth of training on how to deal with school-related issues.
Thank you. I asked the question because we talk about making sure that our policies are, and the way that we respond is trauma-informed. And I don't know if it's police officers who can do that work for other police officers. I think probably in part, but I think that work really comes from the physicians, the social workers who, the counselors who are doing the training around issues of cultural sensitivity around issues of gender identity, that you hear oftentimes. One of the reasons why folks don't report or don't feel comfortable is because they don't feel like the police are going to be responsive.
Councilor Murphy made a good...
I missed this part, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Councilor Murphy made a good point about training. One of the good things about the Police Reform Act is the access to training, and training is becoming more open and more welcoming. And in this certification process, you'll see a lot of this training rolled out in the next few months.
Okay, thank you. What is my question, and I think it dovetails off because there's a related issue here with, what are the services that we're providing to an individual student? around issues of mental health, around preventative issues. And I'm just curious what you think the ideal support system for a student at a school looks like. I know that might not be directly responsive to this issue, but I do think that it helps in terms of prevention and in terms of understanding how we support a whole student so that they know where to turn when they have an issue, and to prevent any misconduct, right? Oftentimes, if it's folks acting out or if it's folks, hurt people, right? And so if we are able to stem the hurt, what does that structure in a school setting look like to you, Doctor?
Thank you for that question. So as we think about, I love that question.
I was like, it was hard to articulate. I was like, should I even ask this?
How much money do we have? I think, right, it often comes down to dollars, but I think we are in schools that are heavily under-resourced in general, and then mental health is often kind of a last resort. So I see, depending on the size of the school, having at least 2 clinicians on staff. One of the things that I think has been helpful in our school is our role is we engage in different tiered approaches in working with young people. So we're not just a clinician, but we're doing some of the sex ed or the mental health education. We're working alongside teachers, teaching some content that's relevant to our role. So students are getting to see us not just as the therapist in this office that I get sent to or go to if I have a problem, but they're seeing us as part of their whole school and part of the adults, the supportive adults in the system. And so I think that's a model that's really, I think, helpful for students because they see clinicians and clinical support at different levels. It's not just if or when you have a problem, but it's a supportive role and you can come to us. So again, I think whether it's social workers, psychologists, mental health counselors, people who have that training, who have at least a master's level training in providing resources in assessment, but also in providing supportive care.
Thank you. If you have any thoughts on ratios, I'd be curious about that as well in terms of like the number of students guidance counselor should have, the number of students every social worker should have. I think that would be, good information for us to have. If not now, something maybe through the chair. I recommend that if later. I'm curious to know these numbers so that when we are talking to BPS and we are talking to DESE, we can, talk about what we've learned from practitioners as well. Thank you.
I think that's a great question, and I know you're not asking me to answer that now, and I don't have the ratio numbers, but I think as we're coming out of this pandemic, we're seeing elevated levels of mental health concerns, and so thinking about that in context, this is not going away, and so how are we, add in services, or maybe different levels of services, right? They don't necessarily all have to be licensed clinicians, but how are we ensuring that there are additional supportive adults in school buildings?
Thank you. Appreciate that. And to the student, I'm really sorry I missed your testimony, but I'm sure it was really wonderful and amazing. So.
Thank you. Councilor Eugene? Good. Thank you for that. I'll just ask a few questions because I'd love to make sure that we give an opportunity for those who are waiting for public testimony to enter the space. So, I think I'm going to ask Amaya the same question in regards to, when you think about how a young person could feel fully supported when they've had the courage to speak up, what would you say would be the best practice for adults to support young people through that journey?
Okay, I have one answer for you, which is we need to implement more therapy services in our schools. And when I say this, I like how you said that there's not just a therapist where students have on their schedule, they go see this therapist for this long, but one that's free for all. So if a student is going through something, they can go to their office and they're not just meeting with the student for like an hour and they have to sit with this. There's one that's connecting with students one-on-one, because obviously a one-on-one connection is the most important thing. When you feel feel a connection with the teacher or staff member. You feel more comfortable talking to them. And having more diversity in our therapy services. So, you know, there's not too many just black therapists in the school. There's not too many white therapists in the school. It's an equal, diverse, so everybody in the school feels like inclusive and there's somebody that they can go to. And having more resources available in schools that can be like, with cards, I'm thinking like cards with like a crisis number or anything where if students feel like they don't have anything, they can go right to the main office and grab that card and go about, you know, having resources for themselves if the school isn't providing the right ones.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Counselor Murphy and I are just keep smiling over here, just like, oh my God, yes. Yeah, so, you know, I think I'm hearing a number of different things, and I think, Sam, as you, Mr. DePina, as you start really thinking about operationalizing this, alongside BPD and the school safety, and with the expertise of the clinicians and the students, is really putting together some comprehensive information. Here's 5 things that you need to know. What are your rights? I know I worked with a group of young people knowing their rights around immigration issues that came out a few years ago in the Boston Public Schools, but I think something very similar as your own sexual health and your rights. There is an opportunity, to Maya's point, to really help people understand that they have the right. And these are the protocols and procedures, because I don't think that even parents know about the importance of filing and what that looks like, because it does take a lot of courage. You have to think about a lot of things in doing that. But I think that there is an opportunity there for some education, and that it lives within the system's place, right? And to be truly transparent. You know, I want to say 2 things, and then I'm going to move on to public testimony, and then I'm going to, before I do, I'm going to ask my colleague here if you have any follow-ups. But, you know, I've heard from students that had to report, and sometimes they've had to report to adults that they don't feel safe or comfortable with, and in scenarios that make them feel uncomfortable, like in a little room with a male, and they just happen to be the dean of students, right? So that's the role of that person, and you would think that that person would be well equipped. But I'm just curious, Sam, in terms of just kind of like, how are we creating space for young people to disclose, and how are you all thinking about potentially redesigning that process so that young people can feel safe going to an adult, even if it might be someone of the opposite sex?
Sure. I think the first thing that comes to mind is a lot of the training that we're doing in PD that we have available, that schools are doing around building relationships between students and adults. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Councilor Murphy, but a lot of schools are taking the time now to really drill down the importance of building those relationships with students, because that's what's going to foster a lot of that trust and a lot of that ability for students to reach out to adults, and for adults to be more mindful of like the dynamics that students are facing, what they're bringing to the school, how they're feeling in the morning, if they're hungry, if they're not in a good space and need to talk to someone. So I think a lot of the work around that's ongoing. The other thing that I would add to that is, I know with regard to spaces and where people go, there are different avenues that people do. They go to a private office. Sometimes they go to the library in a quiet space. Sometimes they go for walks outside and around the campus. Sometimes they meet and talk during lunchtime. So there are different places, physical spaces where they go that people know to just pull away from the rest of the school and get some privacy and allow this conversation to happen. And sometimes it occurs with parents. Sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes students feel that it's not appropriate. I would also add, though, that we have had experiences where males have felt very uncomfortable around some of these issues as well. So that is a thing as well. I just wanted to name that because it hasn't come up in this space yet. I also want to name that it's important for us to give them the same tools as a female would feel, because that does occur. So I think in whatever we do, and I do appreciate Maya's comments and her insights and feedback, because she's spot on about kind of some of the experiences that students are feeling. And I think we have to continue to push and strive and listen to see but students are recommending to move forward.
Yeah, and you could tell that Mr. DePino's in a safe space because now he's naming things. Normally, I'm the one who's naming things, but we're getting real comfortable. Okay, I'm gonna let you.
Feeling the
win.
love.
Yes. So I want, Dr. Jackman, did you want to share something? Because your light is on. Or no, you're good.
Oh, no, I think it came on.
Okay. But I want to push a little bit more on something else that we haven't touched upon here, is that it's really scary when it's a student having to report something that an adult has done to them. And I really want to talk about some of the power dynamics that exist within that space. And I'm just curious about how BPS is addressing some of that reporting.
Sure. So what we're trying to also do is build in redundancies and other avenues for families to report other incidences. So beyond the school, there's also a level of hierarchy that we may need to do more education on to families, right? So every school principal and head of schools has a supervisor. And that's also an avenue that a school or parent can take. There's also an operational leader for every school that tends to deal with a lot of issues and concerns of students and families. We also have an ombudsman person centrally that helps liaison between different concerns that families have. And more recently, we've established a hotline, or helpline, I should say, not a hotline, a helpline, essentially where parents, students, constituents, partners, anyone can call and they can receive information about different concerns that folks have. That number, for the record, is 617-635-8873. Again, it's 617-635-8873. So we're trying to build in some systems so that way people don't feel comfortable with what's going on the ground at the schools, but there's multiple avenues centrally where they can report stuff that we can follow up on. And obviously, Equity Office is a phenomenal resource as well. So people can feel free to call directly to the Equity Office, and they have the support that they need as well.
Thank you for that. I appreciate all of that, and I also want to say right? And I'm glad that Captain Hussein named the fact that we are in transition and that we're going to have new leadership in different spaces, right? Which gives us an opportunity to rethink how we do business, to Dr. Jackman's point. And I think that the only way we're really going to be successful is if we're able to be honest about our shortcomings and about where do we need to fill in the gap and who's going to be lined up to fill in that gap, right? Because there's a lot of tension right now. And I will say that as I used to work in the education space, so I have a lot of parents that call me about everything, even before I became a city councilor, now in this role. And there were some scenarios that happened in the particular school, and it was in the news, so we already know it was Madison Park. And just the way the information came out, parents did not know what was happening. Communication came out after the fact. There was an email, it was delayed. And I don't know, still to this day, what came of that. And there is this culture, I believe, in our education system of letting things just quietly die down. And this inability to take responsibility or accountability or figuring out how do we repair the harm. And so this is not about blame. I just want to name that for every action, there is an impact that has on the families on the receiving end. And I just feel like, because it's a personnel issue, I'm not going to get into it here in this chamber, and I understand there's some sensitivity around that, but I want to just bring it into the space and put it on the record that at some point, as we start thinking about redesigning systems, that there needs to be a part of trauma response and support services for families who, whether it was through an email, whether it was through just being in that school, that there needs to be some triaging and some support services that happen, regardless of whether or not they were the victim. There's still some work and some closure that hasn't happened in a number of different spaces that I think we can all learn from as we think about system redesign. And so I just wanted just to utilize my mic to just uplift that as something that we can be mindful of. Before I move on, I wanted to see if, do you have another follow-up?
Yep, just quickly. And to follow up on that also, I was going to tie that in because, BPS has a culture of not freely sharing information if it's third grade reading levels or, assaults at schools, especially, if the data is not good. If it's true or not, like I said earlier, you can say, the police will say you're safe, but if there's not a feeling of safety, right? So it has to just be more open and free. Or only share if it's forced, right? If the email comes a few days later because there was pressure or trying to make sure the spin is put on it. If that's true or not, that's what the families feel, right? So we have to do better at that to earn more trust because the trust is necessary. And in the first panelist, the Office of Equity was talking about when it's a year when we have more incidents reported, that may be actually something that's good because that means we're doing better at making sure students feel or staff feel that there is systems in place. So just to leave on that point that we shouldn't look at a rise in incidents being reported as something that's bad, so then we shut it down or we don't want to share it because we don't want people to think that that means we have more cases, that we're just open from the beginning of what that means. And even if at the beginning when we're changing, if it's the curriculums or the systems where students can report, that we're open at the beginning, that we hope to see more cases reported, and these are the supports we have. Because we can report the cases, but then what do we do with that? And there's the legal side that we touched on, right? Is it a 51A? Are the police called? Is the hospital involved? But what are we doing as a school? And what are we doing as a system if we see that there are certain schools that have higher levels of students not feeling safe? So something we definitely need to work more on, and I'm glad that we started this conversation, and just to be, open and honest about that. Even if the information isn't great, we still need to share it because we can't get better and work together and feel that we can trust each other and that we're in this together. I know my colleague's here because she cares about the students. I'm here because I want, children first, and what can we do? And in this case, also the staff needs to feel safe coming to work. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Murphy. I feel like she and I are like two peas in a pod here when it comes to education. We have a deep commitment to helping BPS be set up for success. And part of that is how do we do this together? And I'm glad that we have students, we have, the Boston Police Department, we have the school safety folks here, we have clinicians. Like, it's going to take all of us really to lean into the discomfort oftentimes so that we can design something that is going to feel like we've all played a role in what that looks like. And so, I hope as we continue to have these conversations that you see us as partners, right, in that dialogue. I'm going to ask, so before we move on, I wanted to quickly thank our panelists for bringing so much of yourselves into this space. I know for those folks who've been in front of me thought this was going to be different, but I'm so glad that you came here with an open heart and felt at ease, and so thank you for joining us and for your thoughtful questions and comments from my colleagues. I'm going to ask central staff to open up the floor or the Zoom for our public testimony. I believe we have two people. We have two or three people signed up for public testimony in person, and 2 people signed up for public testimony via Zoom. So with that, we're going to move on to our public testimony portion of today's session. And I know, Driscoll, you were here for a while. I know that you were brought in maybe next time, but actually while you're here, was there something that you wanted to share with us and help us understand some of your work?
If you want him to,
Yeah, absolutely.
he's
Why
very
don't-
good.
Come on down, Driscoll. You're the next contestant. Come share with us a few of your tidbits with us. We want to make use of your time and respect your time and really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. So want to create space for you to help us understand the way the Boston Police Department's division that you oversee, how they're supporting our families and students.
Sure. Once again, my name is Lieutenant Richard Driscoll. I'm the commander of the Sexual Assault Unit, Crimes Against Children, Human Trafficking, and the Internet Crimes Against Children Unit, which is located in the Family Justice Center over on Commonwealth Ave, which also houses the Domestic Violence unit as well. I don't know if you want me to go into specific numbers or anything like that.
No, it would just be helpful if you can help us understand kind of like how your division interfaces with Boston Public Schools, and what would you say are some of the best practices or some of the areas of growth?
Sure. I know Counselor Ruth C. had asked about our training. So specifically, the Sexual Assault Unit receives trauma-informed training, which includes the physiology of the brain. It's 40 hours of very, very extensive training, including instruction by survivors of rape, clinicians, doctors, and also law enforcement and training experts as well. And they kind of collate that together in an extensive training. So our detectives are trauma-informed, very, very cognizant of re-victimization and the other issues that exist. What's different with SAU versus most other units in the police department is we don't solicit people. We are response-based. So when we have an incident or a complaint, we respond and we kick in our process from there. We're also bound by what's called the first complaint rule, and that's something that, when you mentioned increased training and collaboration between BPS and BPD, the first disclosure by a survivor of a sexual assault is an evidentiary rule for court, if it goes to court and if it goes to trial. And that is, to simplify it, the only admissible additional statement beyond the survivor's statement if it goes to court. So if we have bifurcated, non-coordinated investigations, specifically of, let's say, rape allegation, it could derail a case and it could derail justice and closure. One additional Massachusetts MGL 4197B requests and requires that all sexual assault investigators take a course, take a 40-hour course, which includes trauma approaches and other things like that, which is delineated by the MPTC. So those are specific aspects of what the BPD's approach to sexual assaults, crimes against children, and human trafficking, and those type of issues that we take. And another very specific difference is that we are not strictly there just to make an arrest and prosecute. We have a number of referral services such as BARC, which is the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center, the CAC, the Children's Advocacy Center, SANE, and all these other processes. So a lot of times we're still able to get closure for a survivor, but we're also able to mediate a process, and I think in some cases lessen trauma to both sides. And I know that you spoke of some of the issues with BPS and school safety transfers and things like that. So there's a lot of positives that the SAU, the Sexual Assault Unit, Crimes Against Children, Sergeant Detective Harris and her crew, they just do amazing work, and they are cognizant of that school to prison pipeline. Like they're not trying to feed that pipeline. They are specially trained. They're on the same page. So just to echo what a lot of the people on the panel had said is training, communication, and we are all in this together. And I think, you know, if people know more of how we approach sexual assaults, I think they'll feel more comfortable with allowing us, you know, to be a part of the process. So I guess that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that we brought you into the space, because one thing that really stood out for me was your use of the word survivor. You didn't call us victims, right? Like, so that is already like really appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. No questions? Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
I'm going to, I believe we have Zoom. We're gonna, the Zoom, okay, the Zooms has zoomed out according to my man over here, Juan, right? The Zoom, okay, so we're gonna go to the people who are here. So we're going to, for public testimony, we have 3 people. We have Sergeant Detective Pam Harris. I know you signed up. You're like, if we need you, okay. Melissa S. and Maya Johnson. Yes, okay. Come on down. So for the record, if you could just state your name.
Yes, my name is Maya Johnson. Good afternoon. I'm 16 and I just completed my last day as a junior today.
Yay.
Thank you. Starting off, I would just like to say that school is no environment where anyone's safety should feel threatened or jeopardized, let alone a child. As a previous student of BPS, and my mother being Dacia Campbell, who is the assistant superintendent in the Division of Schools in the BPS, at BPS, and also the BPS Code of Conduct, co-chairperson, I can say that it is vital that not only victims of sexual misconduct, but all students are to be taken into account for the possibilities of any sexual assault event to take place. But at the same time, the same trust I would have in telling my mom about a sexual misconduct situation at school is the same trust I should have in our schools to tend to my situation, because not many have a mom like mine. But what happens to these survivors long term? No woman, let alone a student, can breathe through the repercussions of sexual assault. Survivors need recognition of their mental health battle every day. Communication is needed. These survivors are in need of school implementation of reassurance that any current or future events of sexual misconduct of any kind will be handled physically and emotionally long term, not just for the moment and not just after the incident takes place. Survivors are not only repeatedly dealing with the situation alongside the administration, but they're also battling with the social controversy and the internal and self-reflection about the incident itself and or speaking up about it. We spend a portion of our lives at school, and the least we could be granted is a clear emotional support system from our schools. What stuck with me was when Dr. Gail Crum-Swaby from the first panel mentioned that these emotional effects of sexual misconduct or any event that takes place during our adolescent years carries with us as we're adults. These events or these incidents affect how we respond and react in situations and how we view the world and ourselves, suggesting that these same students who experience sexual assault at a young age are prone to experiencing behavioral and emotional challenges as an adult. No student is able to learn in an environment where they're constantly focused on the prevention or repercussions of being a survivor. In closing, I also just want to add, listening to my friend Maya speak, I've learned to appreciate that at my private middle school, I had access to a licensed Black psychologist, female psychologist, I must say. And I never realized and I never appreciated how much I needed her until I didn't have her anymore after and during my school year. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you waited so long to be heard, and I'm so glad that you got to take in everything that you heard here as well. So I just want to say thank you for being so patient. I always say we got to lead with public testimony and then go into everything else, because you guys are so patient. So just thank you.
Yes.
I have heard that we have someone via Zoom. I believe it's Tony.
That is me. Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for your patience and for coming back to join us. You now.
I can't turn my camera on. It's like, it says you cannot start your video because the host has disabled it.
Okay, so hostess, give Tony the power. There you go,
Hello.
Tony, yes.
Hi.
Go ahead, you now have the floor.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to say. So I have a little script written. From a young age, we are taught to advocate and speak when we feel things are wrong. But what I see is a couple of things wrong. To start, how are we as students supposed to feel comfortable with speaking out on sexual assault when we are constantly invalidated and silenced to keep the peace? Students often don't get the chance to speak out because there are not enough trusted adults in the system. Instead of treating us as human, we are seen as cases, having to go through long years of dread out protocols and meeting a bunch of people in the justice system to inevitably left with the same ending. Another student lost in the system that could be changed in Boston Public Schools had they had took the time to thoroughly, and by thoroughly, I mean years of training individuals to appropriately and compassionately handle each situation with care. On a personal belief, I found that certain situations get different approaches. We overlook the children who get called dramatic and or troubled because, you know, as somebody who used to get, I'm gonna go off the script a little bit. As somebody who used to get called dramatic and troubled as a young kid, it's hard to sit and want to go speak out against these injustices that we face when you don't know what you're gonna be met with. You don't know if you're gonna get invalidated. You don't know if you're gonna get compassion. You don't know what's gonna happen. And going back on script, as a school system, we must acknowledge the shortcomings of the system. We fall short with supportive and trained individuals. We fall short on up-to-date sexual education. Students should not have to learn the hard way about consent. Lastly, we need individuals who have been through situations to really shed light on all of our shortcomings. It is easy for one to say they know how to handle a situation when not being in that situation, yet you find yourself in that situation to do inevitably the wrong thing. We as a system need to better represent all students, male, female, asexual, gay, straight, trans, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us and uplifting your testimony here. We heard you loud and clear. Thank you. I am going to, bye doctors. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Melissa. You now have the floor.
My name is Melissa. I'm a born and raised Bostonian and current Boston proper resident. I'm a taxpayer. I'm also a Boston Public Schools graduate and part of a BPS family. Often I jokingly refer to myself as a geriatric millennial, and my generation was one of the first Boston Public School students to have access to the World Wide Web in our classrooms. I can't help but think of my 4th, 5th grade teacher and his thankless efforts to stop my male classmates in elementary school from using school computers to view pornographic websites. During my time as a Boston Latin School student, I attended school with many classmates who were, in one way or another, affected by the 2002 Boston Archdiocese abuse scandal, as reported by the Boston Globe Spotlight team, which was later dramatized in the 2015 Academy Award-winning film Spotlight. In the mid-2000s, the MBTA Transit Police Department and BARC, B-A-R-C-C, partnered for a public awareness campaign called Rub Against Me and I'll Expose You. After several of my Latin school classmates were subjected to sexual harassment on public transit during our morning commute to school. Thank you, Counselors Mejia and Murphy and everyone here for having this hearing today. When I last offered public testimony at a city council hearing, I spoke about the now defunct Be Together mandate as enacted by Michelle Wu in January 2022. Though the mandate is now rescinded, the mayor continues to litigate with city employees in court. And everyone who lives in Boston, works in Boston, visits Boston, attends school in Boston, are still feeling the negative impact of the now defunct Be Together mandate. At that hearing, I spoke in general terms of the various groups of people who were negatively and traumatically impacted by Miss Lady Michelle's mandate. The city of Boston, particularly Mayor Michelle Wu, ought to be deeply and profoundly ashamed for enacting a mandate policy which showed zero compassion or consideration for survivors of sexual assault. In hindsight, I marvel at what a month January 2022 truly was. January 2022 was when BPD Sergeant Shana Catone spoke at an anti-mandate protest at Boston City Hall. Catone mentioned that at the time, Boston was experiencing, quote, 13% uptick in rape. This was shortly after BPD issued a public advisory to warn the public after numerous incidents of spiked drug drinks, colloquially referred to as roofies, were reported in Boston bars and businesses. We are here today after a second BPD advisory was issued on approximately May 22nd, 2022, regarding the same kinds of drug drink incidents happening in Boston area businesses. These incidents are still happening, and very little seems to be done on the part of the city to prevent these incidents or offer material substantial support to survivors. To say this is disgusting is a profound understatement. As Councilor Mejia said in her earlier remarks, a hearing like this is for all of us to hear, and evidently the undue attention and resources devoted to enforcing Michelle Wu's Be Together mandate resulted in these drugged, spiked drink incidents not only increasing, but going entirely ignored. Not a single business, as far as I know, posted conspicuous notices warning patrons and reminding them of the best practices to stay safe, as BPD and the Boston Licensing Board explicitly required these licensed businesses to do. Believe me, I checked. What I did see in these businesses were conspicuous notices posting demanding that certain customers entering certain businesses be forced to affix a medical device to their body, to their face, to their person. The musician PJ Harvey sang, "Shame is a shadow of love," and the ominous, ever-looming cloud of shame hangs over Boston, the city I love, the city that used to love me back. As Bobby Bland sang, "Ain't no love in the heart of the city, ain't no love in the heart of town." That is exceedingly clear from this current mayoral administration. Shame hangs like a face mask dangling from my ear, like a vaccine card on a lanyard on my purse, declaiming what serological marker may or may not dwell in my blood. Shame, shame. I reject that shame. It is not my shame. However, shame Won Wu. The Be Together mandate is and will be Michelle Wu's shame and the shame of every single Boston municipal employee who enabled these shameful mandates. Where in this city can you feel safe? Where, when you are coerced to declare your sero status and disclose private health information to dine in and support a local business, to simply go about your business and live in peace? Where, when you feel pressured and forced to put something inside of your body that you may not necessarily want, something that you do not consent to? I can only hope that in some way my testimony here helps in a small way to encourage introspection, reflection, and action from all Bostonians. Actual action. Until then, I will lift my voice to protest these disgusting, unethical, and damaging policies of Mayor Michelle Wu. Woo gotta go. I pray for healing, peace, and comfort to everyone in Boston and elsewhere who have been and continue to be impacted by sexual assault. I close with the words of another songstress, Fiona Apple. This mind, this voice, this body cannot be stifled by your deviant ways. So don't forget what I told you. Don't come around. I got my own hell to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your testimony and the fierce passion that you brought into the chamber. Thank you. I do have a quick question in regards to what are the recent numbers and incidents reported this year?
For sexual assault?
For sexual assault.
I'd have to do for, internally to that. We can get back to you on that. That's some stats we have to put together.
Y'all know we were gonna have a hearing on sexual assault. Y'all didn't come ready to give me some numbers? No, I'm just joking. That would be something that we need to get on the record at some point, so make sure.
I think to call it to comparing to previous years.
Yeah, I would love to hear what it looks like from this year in comparison to other years. And I think there's something to be said about people feeling comfortable reporting or not. And I think that is real. So thank you, Councilor Murphy, for passing notes during the hearing. She and I do that. Okay, so I think with that, unless there are any other, Katina, I don't even know if you're still with us, but I just want to say thank you for staying with us and for bringing such a profound experience here into the chamber as a parent. Really do appreciate you. If you could still hear me, just know that you are appreciated. So
I can, and thank you.
Good. I wasn't sure if you were still here, so I'm happy to know that you have stayed, and I hope that you heard that we are going to, for us, it's important for us to listen and learn, and more importantly, take what we learn and do something about it. And we would love to be able to continue to engage you in that process. So
I have a parting request.
yes.
Please, please, please put into policy, put into protocol that parents have to be involved with what happens with their children when their children are in the care of the school system. They must be involved, they must be advised. It's so pertinent that happen.
I would have to underscore that it's really important for parents to be notified. I shouldn't have heard that from my 11-year-old at the time. So, yes, I got you, Katina. We're gonna make that happen. So I just want to thank our panelists and those who offered public testimony. I think that, you know, it's almost 6 and we're gonna end on time, which is normally not the case, but this was, I hope that for those who stayed as long as you did, it's good to see you here, and I'm glad that you stayed for the long run too. So I just wanted to just thank everyone for attending this hearing. You know, as the chair, I will move to recommend that this order stay in our committee. But for now, I'm going to bid you all a beautiful evening. Thank you to Juan Lopez for helping to coordinate. Asla, for my team, yes, give it up, Asla. She's like, stop it. She hates attention, but our policy director is out, and Asla has stepped up to really help coordinate, and you've done such an amazing job helping to facilitate this for us. So thank you, Asla, and thank you, Maya, for bringing your voice into this space. Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for those who tuned in. I am going to call this hearing to a close. Thank you. There we go.